Tonight, we are back into our biblical archaeology series. We are now travelling with the children of Israel to the Jordan River crossing.
Prior to crossing the Jordan River, Israel encamped at a place called Abel Shittim in a plain near the River Jordan. You see it on the right of the map over here. Moses had died, and Joshua was appointed as successor to lead Israel into Canaan. Joshua chapter 1 tells us that the Lord spoke to Joshua and said, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over the Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I give to them." They were to head in the direction indicated by the arrow there. When word got around the camp that they were all going to cross the Jordan, you can imagine them wondering, well, how on earth are they going to do that? It was too deep to wade across. What made matters worse was the fact that being summertime, the river was overflowing its banks due to the melting snow on the Mount Hermon range. The Israelites had no rafts, they had no boats with them, and there were no bridges to cross. And the generation facing this situation had not seen the Red Sea divided when Israel came out of Egypt 40 years beforehand. That generation had passed off the scene, of course, due to unbelief and negativity. But the present generation had been told about God opening up a path through the Red Sea for his people to walk through. And now they had the opportunity to put their faith in him to get them across the River Jordan, sections of which are being presented in these pictures on the screen. Here we see it's muddy waters in time of flood. You can imagine the people coming down to the edge of the river and looking across and wondering, well, how on earth is God going to do this, getting us across to the other side? No doubt a lot of discussion took place among the people over this question. A message went out from Joshua for all the people to prepare their provisions, because within 3 days they were going to pass over Jordan to possess the promised land. Later they were told that when they saw the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant down towards the river, they were to leave the camp and follow them, leaving a space of about 2,000 cubits. That's about 915 metres or 3,000 feet between them. In the meantime, they were commanded to sanctify themselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you, Joshua said to them. When tomorrow came, Joshua spoke to the priests, telling them to take up the Ark of the Covenant, which, as you can see in this picture, was covered with a blue cloth. They were told to carry it down to the Jordan ahead of the people. Furthermore, Joshua said to them, "When you arrive at the edge of the water, stop and stand still there." Joshua then told the people that they were about to witness the fact that the living God was truly with them. He told them that when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark stood in the river, it would stop flowing, for the water upstream would pile up, that is, be dammed up and stand as a wall. And that's exactly what happened. Joshua 3 verse 16 says that the water piled up far upstream at a place called Adam near Zaretan, which was about 32 kilometres, about 20 miles upstream from the Israelites. And there it is up there. The Israelites, remember, are down around here. The pile up of water caused the flow downstream to the Dead Sea to be completely cut off, enabling the Israelites to walk across on the riverbed. In the past, some have scoffed at this reference to the River Jordan being dammed up, but such scoffing really is without justification, because it has happened since, not only at the River Jordan. In 1906, the river became so choked up with debris as a result of an earthquake that the riverbed on the lower reaches near Jericho was completely dry for 24 hours. Arab records also mention a similar occurrence on the 8th of December, 1267 AD. The river's quite narrow in places. Actually, it's down to 9 metres, about 30 feet wide, and undercuts the banks. As a result of a severe quake, the banks cave in, tons of soil crash down, easily damming it up, causing the lower part to dry up. In 1924, the same thing happened, and again in 1927, causing the flow of water to stop for 24 hours. Some skeptics, being aware of these facts, have tried to use them to attribute the damming of the river in Joshua's day to natural phenomena, not supernatural. But the main point is overlooked, namely that God told Joshua the precise time that the river would stop flowing and arranged for Israel to be ready and waiting to cross over. Now, if that isn't supernatural, then what is? Even today, seismologists with all their modern sophisticated equipment can't predict the precise time of an earthquake and a cave-in and have everybody standing by ready for it. The event was similar in principle to the provision of quail in the wilderness. Migration of quail over that area was natural and common, but who could predict the specific time and place that it would occur and arrange for it to happen? The God of nature and all natural forces, who stirred up the wind to blow the quail across from Africa to arrive in Israel's camp on time, is the same God who caused the River Jordan to dam up at the precise time that his purpose required it. Such is the God worshipped by Christians throughout the world today. A God who has never changed, a God who works through both natural means as well as supernatural on behalf of those who love and serve him. While Joshua led the Israelites across the riverbed of Jordan, the priest carrying the Lord's covenant box stood in the middle of the riverbed till all the people had crossed over. As I mentioned in an earlier program, the Ark of the Covenant was that sacred piece of furniture which was kept in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle, which represented heaven, God's throne. Yes, it did. It represented the throne and presence of God. So the action of the priest carrying the ark into the water's edge, resulting in the river running dry, symbolized God stepping into the situation, opening up a way for Israel to advance and to get victory and take possession of the promised land. One might also say that if Moses leading Israel through the Red Sea symbolized baptism, that is baptism unto Moses, as we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, then being led by Joshua across the river Jordan symbolized a baptism also, a baptism unto Joshua, or Jesus if you like, because Joshua's name means the same, Yahshua. Joshua 3 verse 7 says, "The Lord said to Joshua, this day will I begin to magnify you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you." Interestingly enough, as I mentioned, Jesus' name in Hebrew is Joshua, or Yahshua, and Joshua was clearly a type of Jesus. And it was in the same river Jordan that Jesus himself was baptized by John the Baptist, after which he went into the land to lead his followers to victory over the real enemy, namely sin and death. At this point, I'd like to share something which I think most of you would find interesting if you haven't considered it before. The whole geographical layout of the Jordan is quite intriguing. The Jordan Depression, in fact, is one of the unique features of physical geography in the world. It's a unique geological phenomenon and can be regarded as a parable of life. This is the Jordan Valley is actually up through here. As George Adam Smith says in his historical geography of the Holy Land, quote, "There may be something on the surface of another planet which is similar to the Jordan Valley, but on our planet there certainly is nothing. No other part of the globe which is not underwater lies deeper than 90 metres, about 300 feet below sea level." This relief map on the screen gives some idea of the physical features of the area. The original source of the River Jordan is Mount Hermon, mountain range in Lebanon, which of course is up the top here of the map. Right here. You can see Mount Hermon on this satellite picture up here, around here. The melting snow from these mountains, plus water from other tributaries and springs, supply the upper Jordan, which enters the Lake of Galilee, out of which the lower Jordan departs and flows down to the Dead Sea. Here you have the upper Jordan and the lower Jordan down here. As you can see, the whole distance from the Lebanon mountains down to the Dead Sea is a long, narrow land depression from 10 to 20 kilometres wide, that's 6 to 12 miles wide, known as the Arabah. The Jordan Valley is actually only part or a continuation of a huge break or fracture in the earth's crust known as the Rift Valley. The path of this crack has been accurately traced. It begins far north, several hundred kilometres beyond the borders of Palestine, at the foot of the Taurus Mountains in Turkey. In the south, the depression runs from the Dead Sea to the Gulf of Aqaba and only comes to an end beyond the Red Sea in eastern Africa. But the most interesting or intriguing section of this great Rift Valley is unquestionably the Jordan Valley in Israel, through which the Jordan River winds, as you see here. Starting north of the Lake of Galilee, the depression gets deeper as it goes south, reaching its lowest point in the Dead Sea, which you see here. In fact, the bed of both the Lake of Galilee and the Dead Sea are just a lower section of the Jordan Valley. The surface of Lake Galilee, seen here again, is 210 metres, that's about 690 feet below sea level, and the Jordan River descends about twice that depth before pouring into the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point in the earth, its surface being 395 metres, that's about 1,292 feet below sea level. The steep decline from this lake over a relatively short distance makes the River Jordan quite fast flowing, and in the event of it being dammed by a cave-in, the water below the cave-in would run away and disappear fairly fast. It's hard to believe that the dead water in the Dead Sea started out so pure and fresh in the mountains of Lebanon, which you can see in the distance in this picture, with Lake Galilee in the foreground. Not unlike the scene at Lake Taupo with the mountains in the background. The Hermon Range is 8 kilometres, about 5 miles wide, and 32 kilometres, about 20 miles long. It has 3 peaks, the tallest of which is 2,800 metres, that's just over 9,000 feet, and is easily the highest in the neighbourhood of Palestine. It formed the boundary of Israel's conquest and is visible from many parts of Israel. It was associated with Israel's northern border almost as intimately as the Mediterranean Sea was with the western border. The Hermon Mountain range is only about 50 kilometres, about 30 miles southwest of Damascus, the capital of Syria. In Deuteronomy 4 verse 48, it's called Mount Sion, not Zion, Sion, and was known to the Sidonians, that's the Phoenicians, as Sirion. The Amorites called it Senir, which we read in Deuteronomy 3 verse 9. Being so high, it was regarded as a sacred high place by the ancient pagan Canaanites, who called it Baal Hermon, because Baal was worshipped at a shrine there on the summit. On most of the high peaks of the country were shrines known as high places. The higher, the holier, they believed. Since Mount Hermon towered above all other mountains in the region, it was the chief high place, the shrine of shrines. Canaanites look to Mount Hermon much as Muslims face Mecca when they pray. In contrast to this practice, David asked the questions as we read in Psalm 122 verse 1 to 2. He says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? He then answers, he says, my help comes from Yahweh, the maker of heaven and earth. Snow usually lies on the top all year round, causing plentiful dews in stark contrast to the parched land of that region. Psalm 133 verse 3, which was read tonight, alludes to this. It says, behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It's like the dew of Hermon, which falls upon the mountains of Zion. And for there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. Dew, of course, is refreshing, vital for the life of vegetation in Palestine during summer. So also is unity and harmony in a family, especially the family of God, which is the church. It's also refreshing in a divisive world. Unity in God's family is also essential for life. The Lord demands oneness and only commands blessing where that oneness exists, as we were told this morning. The Arabs call Mount Hermon Jebel Sheikh, which means the chief mountains. They also call it Jebel Ethleg, which means snowy mountains. When the whole country is parched with the summer sun, white lines of snow streak the higher parts of the mountain. Its proximity to Caesarea Philippi has caused many to believe that it was the high mountain where the transfiguration of Christ took place. One of its solitary recesses, rather than its summit, may have been the scene of the transfiguration. Back in biblical times, the Lebanon mountains were famous for their cedar trees, and there were evidently forests of them. The timber was cut down and exported all over the then known world. Egypt imported it for building boats, Assyria imported it to build palaces, and Solomon, king of Israel, had cedar logs floated down to his land to build a temple. Today, a few cedar trees can still be seen in the area. As I said before, the proper source of the River Jordan is in Hermon. The melting snow forms the major source of the water that makes the river. There are several springs, two major ones on the southern slopes of Hermon, which also contribute towards Jordan's water supply. One of these is where Caesarea Philippi used to be, now known as Banya. Here, at the foot of Mount Hermon, a stream gushes out from a cave at the base of a great cliff and goes on to join other sources of the river. These falls carry the waters of the Banyas spring. The water evokes a paradise-like atmosphere even in the midsummer heat. Notice also in the rocky cliff above some shrines cut out, centuries also to the pagan god Pan. In Old Testament times, a shrine was here dedicated to Baal, while later the Greeks built a shrine to Pan, the god of nature, and in 20 BC Herod built a temple of Pan of fine marble in honour of Caesar Augustus near the sacred spot. As a result of Pan's shrine being set up there, the place was called Panis, that is the city of Pan, and it is reflected in the modern name Banyas. At Herod's death, the city fell to his son, Herod Philip, who enlarged and beautified the place and renamed it Caesarea Philippi in order to honour Caesar and himself and to distinguish it from the better-known capital and seaport of Caesarea Maritima on the coast. In a land where rainfall is limited and confined to the winter months, these year-round springs and the river they formed were considered sacred, a gift of the God of nature. And for this reason, the pagans set up a shrine for the worship of Pan, who was the Greek god of fertility. Shell-shaped recesses are hewn out of the rock around the cave where the water gushes out, and which were probably regarded as the source of the Jordan River. The words priest of Pan are still clearly legible there in Greek characters. Being well watered, the area has a variety of trees, vines and flowering shrubs, and is one of the most beautiful localities in the Holy Land. It was to this area of natural beauty that Jesus took his disciples for a brief rest and devotion. After prayer, he asked them the question, "Who do men say I am?" They answered by saying, "Well, some say you're John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He then said to them, "Well, and who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered and says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." After this, Jesus took with him Peter, James and John up the mountain and was transfigured before them as portrayed in this picture. His face shone like the sun, and his garments became white as light. And Moses and Elijah appeared and talked with him about his decease. A bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were filled with awe. All the streams and rivers in northern Israel flow down into Lake Galilee, seen in this aerial picture. The lake is 21 kilometres, about 13 miles long, and 13 kilometres, that's about 8 miles wide at its widest point. This water level sign in the shape of the lake has been set up on the shore at Tiberias. The circumference of the lake is about 52 kilometres, that's about 32 miles, and its depth is up to 60 metres, about 200 feet. The Sea of Galilee has been known by a number of different names, all of them derived from places on its west shore. It's called the Sea of Galilee because Galilee is the name of the region surrounding it. It has been known as the Sea of Gennesaret from the fertile plain of Gennesaret to the northwest. It's also been known as the Sea of Chinereth from the town of this name on its shore, or from its harp shape, because Chinereth is the Hebrew for harp-shaped. When viewed from the hills or air, the lake has the appearance of a huge harp with its bulge to the northwest. Its modern Hebrew name is Yam Kinneret. Another name by which it was known was the Sea of Tiberias, from the city of Tiberias, the capital of Herod Antipas, which dominated the western side of the lake in New Testament times. The water of the lake is sweet, it's cool and transparent. On a sunny day, it's deep blue, and on all sides except the south, mountains rise steeply to frame it in and give it the appearance of a giant basin. The hills on the eastern side rise to the height of about 305 metres, that's about 1,000 feet and more. Those on the western side toward the southern end are of light character, but toward the northwest they are lower and less steep. The lake teems with life, for it abounds in fish. It's a complete contrast to the Dead Sea, for though fed by the same water, it is entirely devoid of life. As far as the Lake of Galilee is concerned, 22 different species of fish have actually been found there. In New Testament times, its fisheries were famous throughout the Roman Empire and produced a flourishing export trade. Some of the fish ended up on Caesar's table. The lake still has fish today, and fishermen can be seen out on the water fishing in their boats, preparing their nets or hauling them in. Some of the lake scenes haven't changed very much since New Testament times, about 2,000 years ago. Much of Christ's public life was spent in the area of the Lake of Galilee. It was the backdrop to many events during his ministry, some of which were quite dramatic. At the beginning of his ministry, some of the men who became apostles were called by Jesus while they were casting a net and repairing a net at the lake. During his ministry, Jesus told Peter to go to the lake, cast in a hook, and the first fish that he catches will have a coin in its mouth, which he was to take and pay the temple tax. On one occasion, Jesus and his apostles went aboard a boat to sail across the lake, and due to his busy schedule, Jesus was tired and he went to sleep. Soon after, a raging storm arose, threatening to sink the boat. So the disciples awoke him, saying, "Master, don't you care if we perish?" So Jesus arose, he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm upon the water. And he said to them, "Why were you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" And they, being awestruck, said to one another, "What manner of man is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." On another occasion, during the evening, Jesus sent the apostles away on a boat to cross the other side of the lake, while he stayed behind to pray. And a storm similar to the previous one arose, threatening to sink the boat. It was in the middle of the night, and the men were terrified. Jesus knew their plight, and he went walking to them on the water. He said to them, "Take courage, it's I, be not afraid." Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Well, come." So Peter got out of the boat into the water and started walking on the water towards Jesus. But when he took his eyes off Jesus and saw how boisterous the wind was, he panicked and he started to sink, crying out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately stretched forth his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got aboard the boat, the wind ceased. After the resurrection of Jesus, some of the apostles went fishing on the lake. They fished all night and they caught nothing. Unbeknown to them, Jesus had come down to the shore. He called out and he asked them if they caught anything. He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you'll find fish." So they cast out the net, and when they hauled it back in again, it was hard to haul due to the multitude of fish that were in it. When the net was hauled ashore, the fish were counted, and the total number was 153. So there it is. Some truly amazing things happened on Lake Galilee during the ministry of Jesus, which testified to the power and the providence of God. In Jesus' day, there was a string of busy towns around the lake, some of which stood on the shore. They formed a flourishing and almost continuous belt of settlement around the lake and communicated and traded across it with each other. The region was the most densely populated in all Palestine, and the sea would have been crowded with boats of all sizes used for fishing at the time. Jesus centered his ministry around 3 lake towns in particular: Capernaum, Chorazin, and Bethsaida, up at the north of the lake, as you see on this picture. He also visited Magdala, the birthplace of Mary Magdalene, on the western side. Today, only Tiberias remains as a city. Tiberias here. Here's an aerial view of it today, standing alongside the lake. It was the largest Jewish city in Galilee in New Testament times when Jesus lived in the land. The population today is about 50,000, so it's similar in size to the population of Wanganui. Although it was an important city, in New Testament times, we have no record that Jesus ever visited it. Some have suggested that this was because Orthodox Jews of his day considered it unclean. But it's more likely that he was avoiding the unwelcome attentions of Herod Antipas. Historically, Tiberias was known for its hot springs, believed to cure skin and other ailments. Tiberias is a popular tourist resort, being next to the lake, and many tourists flock there every year, especially Christian tourists who like to put their feet up in the sun, looking out across the lake, meditating on its history, particularly the ministry of Jesus, which took place on and around the lake, as we have seen. And there are some nice places to stay in Tiberias, looking out over the lake. The sites of a number of the other ancient lake towns are uncertain today, but the site of Capernaum, seen here, is known. You can see from this map the site of Capernaum is up in the northwest sector of the lake. Capernaum became Jesus' base while he was teaching in the region. Matthew the tax collector lived there. It was also here that Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law and the servant of a Roman centurion who had helped the Jews build their synagogue. Archaeologists have excavated around the site of Capernaum, as you can see in these aerial pictures of a site near the shore of the lake. Here's a closer view. Tradition says that the mount from which Jesus gave his sermon of the Beatitudes was not far from Capernaum, indicated by the green arrow up the top there. This Roman Catholic Franciscan chapel, built in 1938, was built where it was believed Jesus gave the sermon. The actual location of the Sermon on the Mount is not certain, but this location has been commemorated for more than 1,600 years. This view of the chapel from the lake gives a better idea of its position. Although no one can be sure of the exact location of the Sermon on the Mount, we can be sure of the sermon itself, given by Jesus, recorded in the Gospels, such as, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." All right then, let's have a look at this diagram here of the fall of the River Jordan. As I said before, the Jordan Depression is one of the most unique features of physical geography in the world, being the lowest depression on planet Earth. Starting at the left side of the diagram, at the highest point, you have, of course, Mount Hermon up here. Moving along to the right to the red cross here, down the slope of the mountain, you have the area where the upper River Jordan starts, still well above sea level, which is that area there. From there, it flows down to what used to be Lake Hula, referred to as Merom in the Old Testament. Here we are here. It indicates where this lake used to be. This area is still slightly above sea level. This lake used to occupy the southern portion of a very marshy basin, about 24 kilometres long and 8 kilometres broad. The Israelis drained the lake and nearby swamps in the 1950s to create about 15,000 acres. That's just over 6,000 hectares of fine farmland. The next black area on the diagram down from Lake Hula is, of course, Lake Galilee, and here. And the larger black area down from there over on the right side of the diagram is, of course, the Dead Sea. Lake Galilee, incidentally, is below sea level. The water surface of the lake is 210 metres, about 690 feet below sea level, and the lake floor is 60 metres, about 200 feet below that. So the floor of Lake Galilee is 270 metres, 890 feet below sea level. From Lake Hula, the upper River Jordan rushes down the next 10 kilometres to the Lake of Galilee, as depicted here. In this aerial picture is the River Jordan flowing into the lake on the eastern side near Bethsaida, which was the home of Philip, Andrew, and Peter. A couple more pictures there of it flowing into the lake. The Jordan then flows out of the southern end of the Lake of Galilee for another 117 kilometres, about 70 miles, that is as the crow flies, into the Dead Sea, which is twice the depth of the lake below sea level. This is an aerial view of the Jordan Valley and the Jordan River, looking north-northwest. The darker section running from top to bottom of the picture is the Jordan Valley, and you can see the river winding its way through the valley. The darker section running off to the right, that is to the east, in the lower part of the picture, is the Jabock Valley, through which the Jabock River runs. It links in with and joins the Jordan River. It's in this area where the Jabock and Jordan meet that the city of Adam was situated, where the waters of the Jordan were hurled back so that the Israelites could cross over the river. The whole distance of the Jordan from its source in Mount Hermon to the Dead Sea is around 190 kilometres, about 114 miles as the crow flies, and it falls 913 metres, about 3,000 feet over that distance. So you can see that Jordan is an apt name for this river because it means descender. It stands absolutely alone among the rivers of the world in that throughout the greater part of its course it runs below the level of the sea. As I've said, the distance as the crow flies from the point where the Jordan leaves the Sea of Galilee to the point where it joins the Dead Sea is only around 117 kilometres, about 70 miles. But the river is so windy, as we see in these pictures, that it is in fact 320 kilometres, about 200 miles long. That is 3 times the length of the distance between the 2 points where it flows. Like a snake, it's seen here curling and twisting, looping its way down the Jordan Valley, heading for the Dead Sea. As death comes from the head of a snake, so death is found where this river heads. Deprivation and desolation is at the end of its tortuous course. Here's another aerial photograph of the Jordan emptying itself into the Dead Sea. Dead Sea is, just see it down here. As you can see, the river's not so windy during this last stretch of its journey, but if you look further up to the top of the picture, you can see it twisting and turning in its normal fashion. Notice also how dry and barren the land is down here in this Dead Sea region. Next to no rainfall falls here, and it's therefore very desolate. What a contrast can be seen further north, where the Jordan is not so far beneath the sea level. In this view, we're looking across the Jordan Valley towards the mountains of Gilead in the east, not far from where the river flows out from the Lake of Galilee. Like a vast irrigation ditch, it meanders southward across the alluvial valley floor. And here we have a Jordanian fisherman displaying the day's catch of carp from the river. The Jordan is, of course, chief tributary of the Dead Sea. Fish die almost instantly when washed into the Dead Sea's supersaline waters, where only microorganisms can survive. The Jordan River is not very deep or wide, despite what some folk songs say, and it does not serve as an effective frontier, especially in modern times. In fact, the thick foliage that grows naturally along the riverbank and the broken terrain on either side of the valley have always given the invader an advantage. In times past, Israel had difficulty withstanding invasions across the valley by other people from the less fertile eastern regions. The Jordan Valley, through which the river flows, is 0.8 to 3.2 kilometres wide. This valley, of course, lies in the centre of the larger valley. The river itself also varies in width from 9 metres to 55, and as I've said, it's not a particularly deep river, varying from 1 to 4 metres deep. It is, of course, at its deepest when the snow on Mount Hermon melts during summer. Between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, there are as many as 27 rapids. Back in biblical times, wild beasts, including lions, used to lurk in the dense growth of the lower Jordan Valley. Jeremiah 49 verse 19, for example, describes the Lord as coming up like a lion from the jungle of Jordan. There are a number of places in the Bible which refer to the jungle of Jordan, indicating dense growth in the area at the time. The river is the only major or important one of Israel and Jordan, and the northern section of it forms part of the border between Israel and Jordan and Israel and Syria. Both Jordan and Israel divert the river water for irrigation and also use it to produce electric power. Water from the Sea of Galilee is also pumped southward through a system of canals and pipelines and tunnels, 142 kilometres long, to irrigate the southern part of Israel in the Negev. The Jabock River enters the left bank of Jordan, 8 kilometres downstream from Lake Galilee, and doubles the volume of the flow. And between the Jabock and the Jabock are 9 perennial streams entering the left bank of the River Jordan. Being in such a low position, the Jordan Valley is a natural hothouse, and being well watered sends fruits and vegetables to grace Europe's tables during winter. Lot chose the region because it was so well watered and fertile. The River Jordan has played an important part in the history of the land during biblical times. In the Old Testament, the most significant event by far was the crossing of it by the Israelites under Joshua. Another dramatic event was the cleansing of Naaman. Although a leper, he was captain of the Syrian army. And a Jewish servant girl told his wife that a prophet named Elisha, who lived in Israel, could do miracles by the power of God. So he took off with his servants and with a caravan of wealth to see Elisha, thinking that he could buy a healing. When he arrived, Elisha didn't even go out to see him, but simply sent a message out to him to go and dip himself in the River Jordan 7 times and he would be cleansed. Naaman, being a man of the world, was proud and objected to this. Such method of cleansing didn't make sense to him. In fact, it seemed quite foolish and stupid, very unscientific. He argued that the rivers in Syria were far better and cleaner than the Jordan, which can be very muddy in some places, as you see here. He could have dipped himself in one of Syria's cleaner rivers, if that's all there was to it, and save himself that long journey. Also, he'd come in great pomp and glory, loaded with gold and glitter, and he wanted this thing to be done in style, in a way that made his pride feel good, and not in a way that humbled him and made him feel foolish. By giving Elisha money, he wanted to feel he'd earned and deserved his cleansing and was indebted to no one. He didn't realise God's gifts can't be purchased with money, and they can only be obtained by humility and obedience to God's will, even if it seems foolish to us. Finally, one of his own men pointed out to him that if he'd been asked to do some great thing, he would have been happy to do it and be healed, so why not dunk himself, as the prophet has said, for it? It's so simple, it's so easy, provided he swallow his pride. So he did, and he got healed. It wasn't the Jordan River that healed him, of course. No, it was his willingness to humble himself, to believe and obey the word of God. And so it is with baptism. It's a test of humility, faith and obedience, as well as being symbolic of the death, burial and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ and the cleansing and salvation that comes from it. You know, in a sense, all members of the human race are lepers. All have a terminal skin disease, which is called mortality, causing it to get old, wrinkled, ultimately dying and corrupting away. The good news of the gospel is that by believing in Jesus Christ and being baptized in his name, there is cleansing and restoration and ultimately a new immortal body like Christ's. In the New Testament, the only direct references to the River Jordan are related to John the Baptist's ministry. Many went out to him to be baptized in the river, confessing their sins. It was called the baptism of repentance and was a preparation ministry preparing the way for Christ's ministry and baptism. John's baptism and preaching caused quite a stir at the time, attracting large crowds. So the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, went down to the river to investigate. When John saw them, knowing what self-righteous, legalistic hypocrites they were, he said to them, "You generation of snakes, who's warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Before being baptized, prove you have repented and turned from sin by doing worthy deeds. Don't think within yourselves you can escape punishment because Abraham's your ancestor. I'm telling you, God is able to raise up children of Abraham out of these very stones that you walk on. The axe is now ready to cut down the tree at the roots. Every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." The Pharisees made the mistake which is fatally easy to make. They thought they were safe and in good standing with God because their ancestors were. But what our parents or grandparents were is of no account as far as God's assessment or judgment of us is concerned. It's what we are personally and our own individual attitude and actions in relation to God that counts. Salvation by proxy, never taught in the Bible. God has no grandchildren, only children. And to become a child of God, each person has to be individually born again and make their own personal commitment and render their own personal service. While John was baptizing in Jordan, Jesus came to be baptized. Not that he needed to repent for anything. No, his baptism was a symbolical enactment of his forthcoming death, burial, and resurrection. In being baptized, he was publicly and formally pledging himself to fulfill the ministry to which he had been called, which involved denying himself even unto death in sacrificial service to God and man. John felt unworthy to baptize him, but Jesus said, "Let it be so now, for it is necessary for it to be done to fulfill all God's righteous requirements." In view of the fact that even Jesus insisted on being baptized in order to obey God's will, it really surprises me that sometimes even some people claiming to be Christians think it's not necessary for them. Several places along the Jordan River are regarded as the place where Jesus was baptized. This is one of them here, but no one can be sure, of course. All we can be sure of is that Jesus was baptized, and it did take place in the Jordan River. This baptism site is quite an elaborate complex, what with stone walls, concrete walkways, ramps, steps and handrails. John the Baptist wouldn't recognize it for sure. It is common for church groups who visit the Holy Land to incorporate baptisms in the River Jordan. Due to the fact that there are believers in all nations, people from all nations come to the Jordan River to be baptized. Being baptized in Jordan doesn't make the baptism any more valid, of course, but if you happen to be visiting the area when you're ready to be baptized, it would be a cool thing to do. No pun intended. As you can see in this picture, sometimes large groups can be involved in the baptisms. It would no doubt be a very memorable occasion, as indeed is every baptism. Well, I'm going to stop at this particular point, and I'm going to carry on with this program. I'm going to do it next Sunday because of the continuity that is involved in it, and what we'll be doing is going down to the Dead Sea region and then drawing some interesting lessons out as we look at this whole thing as a remarkable parable of life.